On March 30th of this year, a tweet about a show that seemingly no one watches went viral. That show's name? Young Sheldon. The tweet, written by Internet Dad 69, reads, "Who is watching this?" which documented their mind-boggled reaction as to how on God's green earth did Young Sheldon get renewed for not only a 5th season, but a 6th and 7th season as well. And it already has 4 seasons. And with over 500,000 likes and 40,000 retweets, clearly a lot of people felt the same way, and many more had their speculations as to which demographic was keeping this sorry excuse for a TV show alive and Chuck Lorre's pockets full of dough. Boomers, like always, were an obvious scapegoat. Retirement home rec rooms were another culprit, and others simply chalked up the CBS hit to a money laundering scheme, the only logical explanation. Because clearly Young Sheldon, the prequel to the longest-running multi-camera sitcom in US TV history, has to be a bad show and only exists as a front to a criminal enterprise if this many people have never heard of it, right? Like, who on this pale blue dot is spending their finite moments watching Young Sheldon? Well, I am, and apparently millions of other people are too. When I first read that tweet earlier this year, I was on my second binge of Young Sheldon. I then watched it a third time when I decided to make a video on it. If you've been on my channel for a while, you know that I'm not a fan of The Big Bang Theory. In fact, I think it's my least favorite TV show in existence, so it took a lot of convincing for me to finally get around to Young Sheldon, but I did, and it wasn't as painful as you might think, but it also wasn't easy either. But viewers, don't be afraid.
Don't be afraid!
I'm here to guide you through what Young Sheldon is, its hits and misses, and its themes to help you decide if you want to watch it, as Season 5 is airing next month. So let's go, and spoilers ahead for Seasons 1 through 4. Young Sheldon was actually Jim Parsons' idea, and he brought it to the producers while filming The Big Bang Theory, for which he got paid $1 million per episode. Casual, and they liked the idea because it was a good idea. Sheldon is by far the most recognizable and most popular character on the show, and in The Big Bang Theory there's constant references to his Baptist Texas upbringing that would make for a solid family sitcom. Not to mention that Young Sheldon takes place in the late 80s and early 90s, which goes well with the whole nostalgia kick we've been on, and helps to connect to Big Bang Theory fans who were probably children around the same time that Sheldon and his siblings were. Chuck Lorre would of course be heading the show, along with Stephen Milaro, who is behind Nickelodeon hits like Drake and Josh and iCarly. Bill Prady, who co-created The Big Bang Theory and who also specifically helped create Sheldon, would be working as a consulting producer and later as an executive consultant. Jim Parsons is also on the show, not as Sheldon of course, but as the narrator of the series. The first episode aired on September 25th, 2017, and went on for 22 episodes with an average viewer count of 16 million people. So clearly, despite my and other people's baffled reactions that there were already 4 seasons of this freaking show, it has a huge fan base. The first and second season's viewership of Young Sheldon remained in the double digits, waning in the third and fourth seasons, but as it already was renewed for 3 more seasons, totaling 7, CBS doesn't seem to be too worried about low view counts. Especially since The Big Bang Theory view count didn't reach its peak until season 9, it's obvious that they're playing the long game, and for Chuck Lorre Productions, that seems to work out. I can't tell you exactly who is keeping this show alive, but I think it's safe to say it's older millennial Big Bang Theory fans as well as boomers, unsurprisingly, as we'll see soon. But first, let's talk about Sheldon.
I'm a very complicated person.
Sure, let's go with complicated.
At his most basic level, Sheldon Cooper is a self-obsessed genius with a bit of a superiority complex. He was born a child prodigy and owns it. He loves being smart, he loves being the center of attention, and he loves correcting people, putting people in their place, and telling people when they're wrong. He loves debating people with facts and logic, and loves owning people in public spaces, specifically religious people like his mom and pastor.
I can use that to humiliate my pastor at Sunday school.
He's a self-proclaimed atheist, and if he was a kid in the 2010s, he'd be an atheist YouTuber. On the first day of high school, he hopes that his peers will make him their leader, and even puts the teachers in their place, one of his true passions. He loves computers because, as he says, they make him feel powerful, and power is his drug of choice. He craves it, and whenever he can't be in power, or when his genius isn't recognized the way he thinks that he deserves, he throws a tantrum. Like at the school science fair, which he declares to be a celebration of mediocrity because he didn't win first prize, because clearly no one else deserves deserves to be recognized for their achievements besides him. The most important thing to him isn't just advancing science, it's him advancing science. He even thinks less of his own family and just sees them as a bunch of apes and believes himself to be the next evolution of human beings, or Homo novus. In short, he sees everyone else as inferior because they're not as smart as him and because they give in to their baser instincts, which he's above because he's logical and rational. The joke being that he's anything but, because the other half of his character is that he's a big baby, has weird idiosyncrasies, is inept in social situations, and lacks emotional intelligence.
She's holding her head with her hand.
And what do you think that means?
Good gravy, she's sad, Sheldon, come on!
The punchline of Sheldon's character is that he's a genius, but doesn't know who Radiohead is and doesn't know when someone's feeling sad. Hilarious, right? His inability to read people or read a room comes from two factors. One, that he sees no need to because he sees that he's above it. For example, he hates the social sciences like psychology because they study why humans do the things they do, and he finds that boring because that's not real science.
Psychology 101, an investigation into why people think and feel the way they do.
The second factor is because he's on the autism spectrum. Though it's not canon in Young Sheldon or The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon is undoubtedly coded as being on the spectrum, and even Bill Prady earlier this year said on my Iain B. Alex podcast that Sheldon is somewhat based on his own experiences as someone on the autism spectrum, and like Sheldon, was taking higher level classes when he was just a kid. So since Sheldon can't be the best at reading people's emotions, he feels insecure and uses his superiority complex as a defense mechanism. It's not important because I'm above it translates to I don't want to admit that I'm not good at something because that's painful for me. And seeing that coping mechanism on screen can be really helpful to some people, especially for kids, as Young Sheldon is a family show, not just aimed at adults like its predecessor. Sheldon as a kid on the show relates to Spock, the X-Men, and other supernatural or alien beings to cope with being different. He relates to supervillains for the same reason, because they're scientists and doctors as well as outsiders.
Sometimes you sound like a supervillain.
Silence!
I think it's good that the show deals with Sheldon's self-esteem issues in a realistic way. He never wants to admit that he's insecure because, as a kid, that's hard, but we know how he feels through the characters and media he idolizes. But what The Big Bang Theory and Young Sheldon don't realize is that Sheldon cannot work through this stuff with comic books and TV shows alone. He needs real help from competent professionals in order to be self-aware of his superiority complex and understand that failure is okay and that it's possible to be both a genius and also need to work on certain things, but that never happens. Sheldon's superiority complex follows him for decades after he's a kid because that's the only way he ever learned to cope with his disabilities, and that's actually kind of depressing. He never got the help he needed, and Young Sheldon can't show him grow too much because that would later retcon his growth in The Big Bang Theory. And even when Sheldon learns to be wrong, like when he presumably makes a mistake on his parents' taxes, it turns out that he wasn't wrong after all, reinforcing this idea that he is actually smarter and superior and doesn't need help, and in doing the lesson he just learned about understanding that it's okay to fail. In the end, the writers realized that Sheldon needs to grow, but rather than learning to be self-conscious about his need to be superior and how that's linked to his inability to understand social cues, they treat the two as separate issues, and the only one they care to grow in Sheldon is his emotional intelligence, but they do that without taking care of his superiority complex. For example, Young Sheldon learns to be more understanding of people's needs, especially his sister Missy aka Melissa, but he still has to be a know-it-all and have his intelligence validated and applauded because the writers don't seem to understand that if you're going to address one aspect of his character, you also need to address the other.
You take it off, and this weekend, I'll take you to Radio Shack.
Sheldon as a kid is treated kind of shittily by his guardians. His mom, Mary, for instance, thinks she knows everything about her little boy, but never actually listens to him. For example, he's okay with not having any friends and enjoys being alone. But because that's not what normal kids do, Mary gets sad that he doesn't have any friends, and to make his mom happy, Sheldon goes out and makes friends that he never wanted to begin with. When his dad takes him on a road trip to Cape Canaveral, he wants to sit in the back seat because it's safer, but his mom insists that he sit in the front seat, which he doesn't want to do. She thinks that he's insecure about being smart, but that's the one thing that he's super confident about. She wants him to go out and play like a normal kid, but he doesn't like playing and wants to stay inside, but because she thinks she knows best, he has to go outside. Mary, of course, is well-meaning, but she's also extremely overbearing and possessive of him. She sees him as her little perfect angel and therefore is unable to see any of his faults, specifically his superiority complex. I guess she thinks it's fine because he needs some confidence after all, but she doesn't realize that sometimes his cockiness can get the better of him. She almost never scolds him because that would mean losing her only ally in the household, as her other two kids don't like her. Sheldon and Mary are peas in a pod because Mary has made sure that Sheldon idolizes her. But in fact, Mary is a wreck. Most episodes focusing on Mary are usually just her crying over the fact that Sheldon is gaining independence from her, and it's agonizing to sit through. Like, get a grip, Mary. At her lowest, it's revealed that Mary has been hiding college acceptance letters from Sheldon and her husband because she wants him to stay at home as long as possible. Mary is framed as being kind of a selfish and bad parent, and honestly, good. Sheldon has been wanting to go to college full-time and challenge himself for years, and his mom has been hiding vital information from him behind his back, while also saying that she's the only one who gets him and is his best friend, and it's like, what a hypocrite. Sometimes I wonder if her babying him is done on purpose so he literally can't live without her. By season 4, Sheldon and Mary's relationship does get better as Mary finally learns to let Sheldon go and do his own thing, and Sheldon sets new boundaries with his mom. They love one another because they truly do cherish each other, but also because each of them inflates the other's ego. Sheldon makes Mary feel like a good parent, and Mary helps to validate Sheldon's superiority complex. I like how the show frames Mary as not a great parent and even calls her out for her holier-than-thou attitude. In the last episode of season 4, Melissa finally calls her mom out for always taking Sheldon's side, and even kind of confronts her for being kind of sexist, as Mary is more strict with Melissa than her brothers because she's a girl. Even Mary and Georgie have a better relationship and bond over their love of movies, but Melissa and Mary are constantly at each other's throats because Melissa wants to grow up and that freaks Mary out. She doesn't want Melissa to end up like her, knocked up at 17 and forced into a loveless marriage, but instead of communicating that, Mary grounds her and yells at her and drives Melissa further away. Going back to the college letter scandal, George, Mary's husband, is rightfully furious that she hid the letters from him because Sheldon is his kid too, but Mary hates sharing her son with anyone, even his own father. George and Sheldon finally convince Mary to let Sheldon go to college when he's 11, and it's like, finally. But this isn't to say that George is a perfect parent, because he's definitely not. George in The Big Bang Theory was described as a drunk and a womanizer, but in Young Sheldon, he's framed as kind of a decent person, but he also hides Sheldon's bow tie on the first day of school and makes him have a panic attack, so it's kind of hit and miss. Him hiding the bow tie is framed as bad, and Mary is framed as right for letting him wear the bow tie, but then a few minutes later sides with George and convinces Sheldon to take his bow tie off because then she'll take him to Radio Shack. So in the end, George's way of protecting Sheldon, which is making him appear as normal as possible, is rewarded and seen as right by the show, which kind of sucks. George is also framed as the victim in his relationship with Mary. He's the castrated husband with his dick in a mason jar under the sink, who had to give up his motorcycle and dreams to settle down with a wife he doesn't like and kids he doesn't understand. A big joke in the first few seasons of the show is that the wives and husbands can't stand each other. Herschel, George's neighbor and fellow father, builds a chicken coop just to get away from his wife since she hates and is afraid of chickens.
She's scared to death of chickens. Is that right? Once I found out building this coop was a no-brainer.
George in season 4 is allowed to be sad and depressed, and it's Mary who has to rethink her actions and the way she treats others around her, which fair because her ultimate fantasy is having her family worship her. I wonder where Sheldon gets it from. But the point is that George is given more of a pass for being sad as a man, whether intentionally or not, whereas Mary, being a woman, is seen as illogical and irrational. Season 4 ends with a cliffhanger. Will George cheat on Mary? And as we know from BBT, Sheldon starts knocking on closed doors 3 times after seeing his father have an affair with another woman. So maybe that'll come out next season. But let me know what you think down in the comments below.
Come out here and eat your cookies out in the world like a man.
Most episodes of the first half of the series revolve around people dealing with Sheldon rather than Sheldon just being able to be himself. For example, in one episode, Sheldon's germophobia kicks in and he creates a quarantine bubble. #QuarantineKing, honestly. And it's not hurting anyone, he's just there playing with his trains, but everyone is so concerned and the entire episode is them trying to make him leave his bubble, and it's like, why? Just let him play with his trains in his astronaut costume. It's done under the guise that they're worried about him, but in reality, they're just worried about how Sheldon will make them look. They don't like Sheldon for who he is because him being neurodivergent and having phobias makes them look weird, and they hate that. So therefore, they have to needlessly interfere with this poor kid's life. And of course, at the end of another episode about Sheldon's hilarious phobias, the joke is that he actually has an endless list of phobias, and how weird that is. Not that his parents are acting irrationally about his phobias.
All that was left was my fear of dogs, birds, insects, germs, hugging, buttonfly pants, rivers, ponds, lakes, oceans, estuaries, corduroy, root vegetables.
Sheldon also likes wearing mittens when touching other people's hands, even with his family. And his whole family, besides his mom, hates this. But it's like, why? They're just mittens? The family even hates that Sheldon cleans when he's upset or frustrated or angry because that's not what normal kids do. And it's like, what doesn't freak this family out? A lot of people clean when they're stressed or frustrated, and that's not necessarily weird. And it's not made even weirder because he's a kid either. Some kids are neat and tidy, and that doesn't mean that they're not normal or that they don't know how to be a kid. Like, let him just do his own thing. In a more serious episode, Sheldon is afraid of choking and only consumes food that has been blended. This goes on for months until the mom and dad finally decide to address it, but Sheldon in the end overcomes his fear on his own by realizing that if he wants to be like the superheroes in his favorite comic books, he has to deal with shit, and that's that. Sheldon is capable of doing things on his own and facing his fears by himself, but because everyone else makes a big deal of things because he's not normal, it makes things more stressful than they need to be. Unfortunately, a big part of the show is wanting Sheldon to be normal and his family being afraid to embrace who he truly is, which, though relatable, I guess, is also kind of really sad. And even more unfortunate, the show can't really be anything but that because if Sheldon grows too much as a kid, it would totally change his character arc in The Big Bang Theory. Even when Sheldon confronts one of his phobias, Sheldon's narration needs to come in and confirm that this isn't a growth moment because he has a million other things that he's afraid of, as if to assure the audience that this doesn't change The Big Bang Theory's canon. Season 4, however, does finally address Mary's obsession with Sheldon, and Sheldon learns to confront the fact that he's growing up, and it's done pretty well. Meemaw gives Mary some solid parenting advice, saying that if they can live without you, you've done a good job as a parent. But Mary is still sad at being an empty nester, even though Sheldon commutes to college and doesn't actually live there, but she's more upset that she doesn't have a bond with her other 2 children. I hope her and Melissa work things out, but we'll have to wait and see. So let's finally answer the question posed by the tweet in the beginning of this video. Who is watching this show? And by the way the show is crafted, it's probably boomers, older millennials, and some honorary boomers, or people of any age who like boomery humor. The family dynamic is very boomer-esque in that the 2 parents hate each other, and that's the joke. The older brother is a womanizer, and they're sprinkled in diet racism, sexism, and xenophobia, which is justified because it's the 80s and 90s and the mom is super religious, I guess. But what really makes me know that this show is for boomers and older millennials to watch with their families is because that the show is basically a Christmas Story, but a TV show. A Christmas Story is a movie about childhood, told from the perspective of the main protagonist, but as an adult. He has fantasies, he talks about his family, and it's a very unsanitized version of childhood while also still being family friendly. And this movie is huge, with boomers who grew up in the era that the movie takes place in, and the kids of the 80s who were kids when the movie came out and who probably watched this movie with their parents growing up, much like me. There's diet racism thrown in there, but no slurs. There's cursing, but nothing too vulgar. There's corporal punishment, but it's not shown on screen. It markets itself as showing what childhood was really like, but it's a very romanticized version nonetheless. And that's basically what Young Sheldon is in a nutshell. It's a nostalgic retelling of someone else's childhood with old TV sitcom tropes because that's warm and familiar for older audiences. There's a hysterical mom, a laid-back dad, a girl-crazed boy, a boy-crazed girl, along with a cool grandma. And lastly, there's a weird kid who you can both laugh at but also find charming because isn't he just so cute? Not to mention that Sheldon is basically a boomer himself. He calls himself an old man, he hates hippies and rock and roll and environmentalism. He also hates that everyone has to be treated equally, and even compares that to what life must be like in Russia.
I also had to listen to rock and roll.
Mine's an environmental activist.
Ugh. I'm sorry, is this Russia? Should we get in line for bread?
There's a lot of patriotism in the show as well, specifically for Texas and what it means to be a Texan, and of course, what it means to be a man. Sheldon learns that he must man up and grow a pair, very boomer-esque sentiments that the show agrees are important. Mima tells Sheldon that Texans aren't afraid of germs, men don't hit girls, and that big brothers need to take care of their little sisters. And she utilizes his need to adhere to rules and his literal interpretation of aphorisms to get him to act normal, or what white Baptist society deemed normal in the 90s, and those lessons are almost never questioned.
Which makes you the big brother, which means that it is your job to look out for her.
Sheldon does ask why he has to look out for Missy just because he's older, but after the initial questioning, Sheldon never reflects on this sentiment again, as seen through the painful narration that he's still the same conservative old man that he was when he was a kid. And though sometimes he shows self-reflection in his narration, like for example when he's unintentionally insensitive to his neighbor Billy, it's very rare, and the patriarchal lessons he learns as a kid about being a man are never really challenged.
I wish I could tell you I realized the cruel irony of what I had just said to Billy and apologized. But I didn't.
One of the reasons why so many people became fed up with The Big Bang Theory is because it refused to change with the times. It started out as a show for young people, but very soon became cringeworthy and only appealed to a certain subset of people who still thought jokes about Indian accents were funny. And I bet the showrunners and writers were very happy and relieved knowing that they could make a prequel to BBT set in the past because they knew that was the only place where their humor and stories could be told. Rather than challenging their own biases or realizing that they need to change with the times and political landscape, they retreated into the lucrative comfort of nostalgia, and I guess I can't really blame them for that. But even though this show is for older audiences, as seen with how they literally explain the game Operation to the kids in the room watching, as I guess kids nowadays don't play that game, it also has to be PC to a certain degree. And in order to do that, they took out the laugh track so you can choose where to laugh, either at the non-PC jokes or at the person telling them and at how ignorant they're being. And they also heavily lampshade racism and sexism and overall intolerance in order to make us laugh because we know that they know it's wrong. But do we? Well, let's look at the characters of color on the show. Firstly, there's Sheldon's friend Tam, who's a refugee from Vietnam. His family had to flee because Tam's family were fighting with the Americans and were later caught by the Northern Vietnamese. When Tam goes to Sheldon's house for the first time, Mary thinks that he's Buddhist, even though he says that he's Catholic, and that's too bad, and says that you must be tired of things wriggling around on your plate. And later we see that as Mary gets older, she's just as racist and xenophobic as ever, so I guess people don't ever really change. Yay. Tam is one of the only characters of color on this show, but isn't part of the main cast, as he's only in some episodes. His main purpose is just to be Sheldon's friend of color, and to justify Mary's remarks, as he later says to Sheldon that he's sick of Vietnamese food and can't wait to eat Sheldon's fluffernutter, much like how Raj always complained about India and Indian food. Sheldon and Tam aren't really close because though they're both intellectually smart, Tam cares about being popular, whereas Sheldon doesn't. Tam's character is also just there to get Sheldon into comic books, which Sheldon originally sees as kid stuff. Get it?
You do understand those are for children.
But then realizes that they're more than meets the eye. In addition, Tam introduces Sheldon to the card game Mystic Warlords of Ka'a, and the two play Dungeons and Dragons together. It's more of a friendship of convenience, but still they are somewhat close, though they have a falling out later as seen with the Big Bang Theory, as Tam eventually makes Sheldon's enemies list. Overall, I like Tam, and I think that he is a good addition to the show, but I do think that the xenophobia and racism is heavy-handed and unnecessary. Even though the show thinks that it's being realistic by having Mary be an ass to him, it really is just there to get a laugh from boomers and older adults in the room, and that annoys me. One of the other characters of color shown throughout the 4 seasons is George's co-worker and fellow football coach, Wayne Wilkins. Wayne and his wife Darlene are foils to George and Mary's loveless marriage, as they are truly in love and have no kids and communicate openly with one another. The joke is that they have a happy marriage and are okay with sharing and expressing their feelings, but the show does frame this as good and healthy rather than cynical, even though George does see them as fake and annoying at first. And I honestly think that's a good thing. Lastly, there's Libby, a fellow high school student who Sheldon gets a bit of a crush on because she's also intellectually on his level and because, like his mom, she protects him, which he appreciates. She's also into geology, and Sheldon is young enough that he's kind of just a Renaissance man and not just set on studying theoretical physics. However, we later learn that he hates geology specifically because of Libby, since she later says to Mary that she babysits all the time, and thus breaks Sheldon's heart and then disappears from the show. When George finds out that Sheldon has a crush on her, he says to Georgie, "You didn't say that she was black," and Georgie responds, "Was I supposed to?" Georgie then calls out his dad for being racist, and it's like it's not racist to call out someone's race or to mention someone's race, but I guess since it is to boomers, that's the joke.
I've got some books in there about Martin Luther King. Maybe you should go read one.
This happens again when Georgie calls his dad racist for separating his laundry.
Separating the whites from the colors.
Whoa, that's racist.
And it's like, who is that joke for? It's for boomers who think that young people are annoying for calling everything racist nowadays. And it's like, no one thinks that separating your laundry is racist. There's also a big emphasis on manning up and growing up hair that I mentioned before that's also obviously really catering to a certain generation. In one episode, for instance, it's revealed that Sheldon's bully is a little girl, and that's the entire joke. Isn't it funny how emasculated he is? And it's like, first of all, he's 9, like he's a little kid, and why is a little girl bully funny? Girls can be bullies, and just because Sheldon is a boy doesn't mean that he can't also be afraid of her. That went over my head, but it's clearly made for a more conservative audience who think that boys shouldn't be afraid of little girls. But like always, the showrunners want to have their cake and eat it too. They want to cater to that boomer demographic who think that jokes about reinforcing traditional gender roles are funny, but they also want to cater to that PC crowd by making Missy pursue baseball even though she's a girl. They want to be empowering when it's convenient for them, but when it comes time to confront how growing up hair is toxic or telling your son to man up is wrong, that's where they draw the line. I will say that I do like how Missy or Melissa does both, that she's traditionally feminine and likes things like makeup and pop music, but is also into masculine things like sports. And though at first only interested in sports because of a boy she likes, she later realizes that she's really good at it and that it makes her happy, and I think that's awesome. I also really like how Mima knows what she wants and is happy being who she is. Yes, a lot of her plot revolves around what man she's gonna end up with, but she also relishes her independence and isn't your stereotypical doting grandma. She dozes off, she doesn't want to spend all day with her grandkids, and doesn't want to give up on her own activities. She has a life outside of her family that she wants Mary to also pursue because that is healthy. And I think it's cool for people to see that and see that there's life after you're 65. In this video, I talked about the TV series Young Sheldon and who it's for and why I like it despite its obvious flaws. The main one being that Sheldon is still the butt of many jokes. The writers make his needs so far-fetched and triggers so exaggerated that it's hard to ever really take him seriously, and the episodes revolve around how hard it is to deal with him and how embarrassed he makes his family, rather than meeting Sheldon where he's at. And in order to make him not a victim in the show, they give him a superiority complex and make him out to be an annoying know-it-all. though season 4 was a step in the right direction as Mary and Sheldon's relationship got less clingy and as we got to see more of Sheldon on his own. We'll have to wait and see if the show really does get better. In the end, I watch Young Sheldon because I think it adds layers to Sheldon's character and is an overall okay, passable family sitcom and sometimes can be really funny. Sheldon gets a lot of great lines and the actor who plays him is super talented. I also like the mother and daughter relationship and think that the women on the show, for the most part, are written well. If you like A Christmas Story and grew up in the 80s and 90s with boomer parents, you'll get this show, but I'm not sure if you'll like the show. You're just going to have to watch it yourself and find out. So that's it for this one. Let me know your predictions for Season 5 down in the comments below. It's coming out next month, and I'm honestly kind of excited to see where it goes, specifically with the mom and daughter relationship. So yeah, let me know what your predictions are. Will George cheat on Mary? And yeah, let me know if you liked the video, your thoughts on Young Sheldon, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you to my patrons and members. Bye.
To boldly go where no man has gone before.